So, I am here today to talk to you a little bit about something I've been raving on about for years and years, which is this idea of a thing called pedagogy before technology. And I'm going to be really honest with you up front. This is predominantly a sales pitch for me, really. It is an opportunity for me to convince you that you should be thinking about your pedagogical problems in your classroom before you think about their technology, rather than the other way around. And I say that in front of lots of classrooms, predominantly of primary school and high school teachers. And those primary school and high school teachers, they always roll their eyes and they go, of course we're thinking about the pedagogy first, we're teachers. And then I remind them how often they would have a principal or a head of department or a technology guy come along and say, look at this great new technology that we found. Apple has convinced us that we should all be using iPads, or Microsoft has convinced us that we should all be using mixed reality. And they buy the technology and then they say to the teachers, what are you going to use this for in your classroom? And the teachers at that point, when I'm presenting them, always roll their eyes and kind of go, yeah, okay, you're right. That happens a lot. And I think it happens a lot in university. We don't necessarily have the head of department or the head of course doing that to us, but we certainly have lots of examples of people standing up and talking about brand new, exciting, interesting technology. And it is really exciting, but we just need to be really careful that when we think about the technology, we don't start with the technology. Instead, we start with the pedagogy. And so here's this first slide, just gives you a bit of that. And the workshops I run for school teachers are called the Weaving Technology into the Fabric of the Classroom workshops. And so this presentation, in a way, is sort of a very abridged version of what I give the K to 12 teachers. And predominantly, this presentation is going to talk about this model, the pedagogy before technology model. And the pedagogy before technology model is a design-based research model, but it doesn't have to be research. You could, if you'd like, just apply PBT and just, get something working in your classroom and not do any research at all if you wanted to. But it does fit very well into the DBR model, design-based research model. Sometimes you'll hear people talk about design science or design science research, which is similar, a little bit different, in that it does have this mechanism where you start with the practical problems. You develop a set of solutions, you evaluate and test those solutions, and then you document and reflect to produce a set of design principles. And then the important thing is you loop back around. So once you've had an opportunity, in our case, to try the technology in your class and to see how it works, then you go back and you evaluate again what other things you might change, how you might improve your classroom practice using that technology to get better results out of it. But the important thing is that the technology is last. And if we look at this figure, I always point out that even though this cog at the bottom, how can technology help, is the biggest cog, it is also the last cog. We should start by thinking about what the problem is. We should then think about how we can solve the problem. And then finally, we should think about how the technology can help us. And I always say to people that I know I'm a technology guy, and I know that I am, first and foremost tech. But even in my presentations, I say that if the technology doesn't make sense, don't use the technology. If you work out the problem and you determine the best way to solve the problem is with, wooden blocks, or blue tack and spaghetti, or whatever, whatever problem you're trying to solve, if that's the best way to solve the problem, role playing, then do that. Forget about mixed reality, forget about artificial intelligence, and focus on the thing that'll actually solve your problem. And some people sometimes go, wow, a technology guy is saying that, and that's, true. I am a tech guy, and I'd love you to use the tech, and I think tech can solve a lot of the problems, but I don't necessarily think tech is the solution for all of our problems. And so predominantly this presentation is a pitch to use the pedagogy before technology model, is for you to narrow down and think about what problems you have in your classroom, and then finally think about how the technology can help. And of course, when you get to this step, if you go, well, what tech is there? There's lots of great resources in the university that can help you with that. And this is a great place for me to plug the virtual, augmented and mixed reality community of practice in the university. And the VAM community of practice will teach you all about how to use virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality in your classroom. So if you've got a problem you think can be solved with virtual reality or augmented reality, go and talk to Jim or go and talk to Daryl, and they'll help you with that. But what I'm going to do to sort of cement this for you is I'm going to give you a little case study. And apologies if you've heard this case study before. It is the paramedic science case study that I always use as an example. But what I am going to do is I'll give you this case study just really briefly so that you can see how it actually works in practice.
A state-of-the-art invention is allowing paramedic students to practice life-saving procedures in the comfort of their own homes. 2 Queensland universities have collaborated to create and build the cost-effective equipment using 3D technology.
It's no game, but doctors and nurses for grown-ups.
Insert blade.
The smartphone application gives paramedic students a step-by-step guide to removing foreign items stuck in patients' throat.
So it's not a skill that we use every single day, but it is a skill, as you can imagine, that if you do need to use it, you need to be competent and confident that you can do the skill properly.
The lightweight tools are made by 3D printers. Each kit costs around 20 cents, about 99% cheaper than the real steel.
Well, you can never truly compare it to real life. Obviously, you've got a patient and you've got the situation, but it still helps to have that muscle memory of doing the skill.
The app was designed to give hundreds of distance education students more exposure to the procedure and better spatial awareness.
Having the ability to, at least see a laryngoscope and a McGill's forceps and see what they like and just step through the process is huge, because these guys only really get hands-on when they come to residential for a week.
The technology was a joint creation between CQU paramedicine experts and Bond University's gadget gurus.
And they're just as interested in us to see how it works and can it be applied to other courses.
Even when I started 9 years ago, this would be foreign, unheard of. Even university was foreign, unheard of. So just the leaps and bounds paramedic science has had is massive.
Tom Hartley, 7 News.
There we go. So this, I say apologies if you've seen this before, because this is a study that we did a few years ago. It's from 2014 is actually when we started. So what's it, 5 years ago now? And we worked on it over several years and we refined it over time. But I always like to cast back to when we started in this study, because I think that really was the start of this PBT model, the pedagogy before technology model, because we knew we wanted to do some work and we knew we probably wanted to do it with some sort of mixed reality, some sort of augmented or virtual reality. I did some work with James Burt at Bond University, so we kind of knew that we wanted to do something with the tech. But we realised even back then, 5 years ago, that there needed to be a pedagogical base for this work. And so we went to the paramedics, we went to the, actually went to the School of Medical and Applied Sciences at the time, and said, we've got this thing we want to try. Have you got some people that might have a pedagogical problem? And they said, yeah, look, the paramedics, and in particular this paramedic that's on screen now, Emma Moore, she might have something for you that might help, that might fit with what you're doing. And I think she does have some issues with training the paramedic students with skills. And so we went, okay, well, let's go and have a chat to Emma. And we went and talked to Emma, and Emma came back and said, yeah, actually, we really do have trouble with training the students about the skills. And she gave us this feedback, and this feedback is from the course evaluations at the time, unit evaluations now, from the students saying that they had issues learning the skills. And the reason they had issues learning the skills is because they were distance students. They didn't get an opportunity to practice these skills before the residential school. And they were clear about it in the evaluations. It was great that we went and we looked, and she was able to say, yeah, I have this pedagogical problem. And we said to her, do you have any evidence? And she said, yeah, look, here's some feedback they gave us in the evaluations. Things like distance students are at a severe disadvantage. There should be a way for us to actually get more time doing skills. You can read about the skills, but it's impossible to get feedback and to know if you're doing it right. And then one of the students even gave us a hint. He said, would there be any software or equipment that could at least go through the motions of doing the skills? And so even though, and I'm always first to admit that we had started with an idea of what technology we wanted to use, we very much so were able to identify that there was a problem here, a very specific problem that had a very specific thing that the students were complaining about. When you apply the model, I want you to think about that. It needs to be small, it needs to be achievable, it needs to be something you can address. And then we said to Emma, okay, well, if you had a magic wand, if you could do anything that you wanted to do, what would you do to these students? And she said, I would send every one of these students one of those mannequin dummies in the left-hand corner of the slide there, along with the metal tools, and then they could practice as much as they wanted. And we went, well, okay, that's really interesting.
10 minutes, Michael, 10 minutes.
No problem, thank you. We said, we can probably do that for you. We can probably help you with that. And so we said, why don't we 3D print some tools, give the students those tools, and then why don't we make an app that they can use to actually see the mannequin head and practice the skills. It's not the same as sending them the mannequin head. And as we went along, a lot of the revisions we've done in the intervening years have been to try and make it more realistic. But at the very least, it will give them an opportunity to practice and to work with that mannequin head. And in order to get them to see the app, because we're talking about 2014, we stuck it in this sort of ghetto hat mount thing. We told them to buy a baseball cap. We sent them these little mounts and they mounted their phone in front of their head. And that allowed them to have both hands free because they had to operate both the scope and the forceps. And then we built this game and we made it free for all the students to download. And what do you know? It worked pretty well. We sent it away to the students, and the students enjoyed using the app, and they gave us some really good feedback on using the app. And they also told us some things that we hadn't considered. And there's lots of stuff I could talk about here, but I've only got a few minutes left. But things like if you have a view like the one on the right-hand side, you can see that the arm of the participant, the person that's doing the skill, on the bottom left-hand side there, if I wiggle my mouse, you might see it come up here, goes behind the patient's head. Now, that's not realistic because it would actually go in front of the patient's head, but we have no way of knowing whether it should be behind or in front of the mannequin head. And so we stick it behind just so that they can see what's going on better. But for them, that was less realistic, and they gave us some feedback about that. They gave us feedback about a bunch of other things as well. And if we look on this slide, we can see that kind of feedback. They said, my hand seems to pass by the simulated airways mannequin. I spent too much time focusing on the markers and not on the tools. If you look back at this slide, you can see these big colorful markers, which actually got in the way for students. And they would sometimes get frustrated. However, they did say they really enjoyed practicing the skills when they were at home. They really enjoyed the extra practice that they got. They really enjoyed just holding the tools in their hand, just the plastic tools in their hand, because you've got to remember the distance students never get a chance to actually use those. And so then on this first trial, we actually found that even though the students liked it, there was not a statistical significant difference. But then as per the DBR model, we looped back around, we made those modifications that they asked us to. One of the modifications was getting rid of the really weird ghetto hat mount and getting something that was a bit better, a bit more stereoscopic. And then in the second round of doing this test, we actually did find a statistically significant difference. So in essence, the students that used the app when they were at home before they came to the residential school were better paramedics when they got to the residential school. And that's what we were trying to achieve, because ultimately that allowed us to address that initial feedback that we got about the problem. And so overall, I'm going to go backwards and cheat a little bit. I want you to remember the model.
To conclude, Michael, if you wouldn't mind.
What's that, sorry?
Ask you to conclude if you wouldn't mind.
No probs. So this model here is the model I want to sell to you, the pedagogy before technology model. Remember the 3 stages. What is the problem? How can I solve that problem? And how can technology help? If you want to know more about it, or you want to talk to me a little bit more, then please go and have a look at the Create Lab website. It's got some more details on PBT and how it works. Mixed reality research is where all of those tools are for paramedics. You can download them for free if you'd like. And I will say that if you are an if you're a vet staff member and you're listening to this, then in about 3 weeks, we are doing a presentation called the Education, Technology and Innovation Boot Camp for vet teachers. That's in North Rockhampton. It's on the 25th of October, and we will be spending a bit more time working through this model, working through this process of putting pedagogy before technology, specifically for vet teachers, but in your specific context.